My name is Johnny Bailey. My wife and I have a son, and we've been missionaries in Japan for 4.5 years now, and I thought I would tell you guys the story of how we got here. So for the sake of time, I grew up in the House of Prayer movement, and my parents did a lot of mission work in the Philippines and all over the place, and my wife's family did a lot of mission work around the globe as well, but specifically in Southeast Asia when she was a child. So we both grew up in missions-oriented homes, and when we got married, I told her that we would consider doing overseas missions, even though I wasn't interested. We were both born in Chicago and raised there, and I was kind of thinking I would just live and die there. I really cared about our local community, and I was in ministry and working at the time, and I really had no desire to do missions. When my wife got pregnant, I started working full-time, and in that I had thrown myself into the study of Jesus, Christology, and I was really deeply moved by that, and it was a pretty natural progression from studying Christ to studying missions, because even while I was living in the States, I started doing a lot more evangelism and a lot more outreach, because I just couldn't really contain myself, I wanted to talk to people about Jesus. So I remember at the prayer furnace on Friday nights, we would do these outreaches, and after our service from 7:30 to 10, from 11 on, we would go out into different neighborhoods and kind of talk with people on the street about Jesus, and had a lot of really good encounters with people there. While I was studying missions, one of the missions teachers just flat out said that if you're not reaching an unreached people group or financially supporting a missionary who is, then you're not taking part of the Great Commission. And that, missions organizations talk about that unreached people groups are people groups with less than 2% of the population is Christian. And since, at the time, my wife and I were really poor, we had no money, I was just like, well, I don't want to be financially supporting a missionary, so maybe we should look into going ourselves. My wife was, maybe 5 months pregnant with our son at this time. So I'm going through all of this, and I haven't really verbalized any of it to her because I didn't really know where it was going. Around this time, friends of ours were getting married, and he had grown up in Japan as a missionary kid, and his brother was visiting for the wedding, and he stayed with my family. He kind of was the one who planted the seed. I was doing research of different unreached people groups, and Japan kind of stuck out to me. And for those who don't know, mission vernacular, more than 90% of the world's unreached people groups live in something they call the 1040 window, which the 1040 window is about latitude and longitude and such. And for an easy way to picture it, kind of picture from Japan all the way to Morocco. So it covers Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Northern Africa. And then another really hard statistic is that I think 1 cent of every dollar donated to missions goes to ministries that are specifically focused in that area. So it's one of those things that the world's unreached people groups actually get a lot less mission support than more established ministries. That makes sense because it's hard. So I dwelt on it for a little while, and I essentially presented my case to my wife that, hey, I think that God is calling us to reach unreached people groups, and I think we should do it in Japan. I think we should look there first. And she was completely unprepared for that. I was talking about making this video, and she was very much like, well, you should be the one talking about it because I was the one who chose. And, I talk with different missionaries who don't feel a particular call for an area or whatever. And, so it's actually pretty simple on how we chose Japan. We knew a couple people here. I knew they were an unreached people group, and I wanted to go to a developed country. I wasn't really interested in going to a Muslim country, and I didn't want to go to a developing country, so that really narrowed it down. I was willing, but I wasn't really burdened to do that. And so between the seed that was planted by my friend's brother and kind of doing some research on Japan, they say Japan is a missionary graveyard and it's where your mission dreams come to die kind of stuff. I felt that we should try it and we should see if this is where God called us to. So we organized a scouting vision type trip when my son was 3 months old. Me and my wife and that friend who had gotten married and his wife came on a scouting trip. They kind of guided us around and took us to different places in Japan. And while we were here, we visited a lot of different ministries, mostly in Tokyo and a little bit up in Fukushima. But we were mostly seeing if this was a place that we could live, you know, what is it like here? Do we want to raise our child here? That kind of stuff. You know, a big part of it, the whole journey was like, just because I felt called to this, I didn't know my wife did, and my wife needed to be on board. So we ended up, you know, after the 2 weeks, we spent some time in prayer and we felt that God was inviting us to this country. So we started to let people know, and we were like, hey, God's calling us to Japan. And we started to do that pretty classic missionary thing, you know, where we're trying to raise support and figure out how to get overseas and how to get here. We kind of lucked out because my wife has a degree in teaching English, and she got that degree because her parents were missionaries and she knew it would be an easy way to get onto the mission field. So at first we were looking in the more traditional route of going with a missions organization like YWAM or something and living on raise support and going full time, but I didn't really feel completely comfortable with that. I didn't want our ability to stay in the country we felt God was calling us to dependent on how much money we could raise or dependent on if people were giving money. You know, like if we went through a dry spell, I didn't want to be forced to come back to the States until we could get back over here. So we looked at different missions organizations for a few months, and we were applying at different English teaching jobs. Well, my wife was applying. And during that time, I was working in Chicago, and we were telling everybody that, you know, we're going to move to Japan as missionaries and do ministry there. And I guess it was really fast, actually. About a year, almost exactly a year after we had done our scouting trip, we had gotten a job and moved to Japan. But a lot of that was really the Lord. It's really hard to live in that in-between place of you feel called to go do missions, but you're not there yet, so you don't want to set down too many roots or make too many commitments because you want to move overseas, but at the same time, living in that in-between place is really hard and draining mentally, and it's really stressful. So we did that for, 9 months or so, and it was just getting really hard and really frustrating. You know, nobody believed that we were actually moving. We weren't really having any luck with missions organizations, so we decided to go as working missionaries. You know, my wife would be working and I would be staying at home with our son and doing missions work part-time, essentially, but kind of more like how we were living in Chicago. That's another thing, you know, missionaries will tell you if you're not doing it at home, you won't do it there. And that's so true. You know, in America, I was already doing more missions-oriented stuff. You know, I was spending time talking with people about Jesus. We were living communally and we had small groups and spending all this time together. So really, our lifestyle hasn't changed so much. We're just in a different country now, you know, with less Christians. But anyway, we had tried a few things and things weren't working out. Missions organizations and jobs weren't panning out. So in April that year, I was like, this is the last one. If this job doesn't work out, we're not moving to Japan for 2 years. We need to settle our life situation here in the States and we'll revisit that. And that was the time that we got introduced to the people who we currently work for. So the people we currently work for run an English conversation school here in Japan, and they're a Christian couple. One is American and one is Japanese, and they basically run this English conversation school so that missionaries can come and live in Japan. You know, it's a lot of introducing the Bible to students and such, but it's also just a way, because it's expensive to live here, that they can come and support themselves and still be involved in kingdom work, right? So when we applied for the job, they were letting us know, like, hey, yeah, we're hiring an English teacher, but we're also looking for someone to partner with us in ministry. We have a house church right now, and, we're wanting that it grows and that it, splits off and starts another house church, and that just keeps going. Which worked out really well for us because my wife is the English teacher and I'm the missionary, and I was like, well, we have experience starting small groups and house churches, and I had served on leadership at the House of Prayer and done preaching and different things like that, and my wife has an English degree, so we're kind of, meeting each other's needs exactly. And so, and it turned out the guy who originally planted the Japan seed in our mind knew this family, and so they reached out to him for a reference, and we started talking to them in April, and we got the job, and that next August we were in Japan. One of the hard things, though, was people didn't believe that we were really moving, or they didn't take us seriously. So when we got the job and we started, selling all of our things, people were like, this is so fast. This is happening so fast. Have you really thought about it? And we were like, well, we've been talking about that we were going to move to Japan as missionaries for a year and a half. We actually visited Japan, and we've been talking about it for a while now. So it's really not sudden. It's really gone according to plan. And that was really hard for our families and for our friends. And then there's the classic thing of, in the Bible, Jesus says, sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. Well, we sold some things. Some of our friends were kind enough to buy things, but most of the stuff we had to give away because we couldn't even sell it. Our book collections, different things like that, we gave away. And we had a reverse housewarming party. So basically people came to our goodbye party, and instead of them bringing us something for the house, we forced them to take something that belonged to us. And so my wife, myself, and our 18-month-old son packed up our life into 7 boxes that weighed approximately 70 pounds each, and we moved to Japan. We were able to do it relatively inexpensively because at the time I worked for an airline, so we flew on standby for free, and we had a high weight allowance and all of that stuff. But we brought all of our money and all of our stuff, and my wife and I were really of the mindset that, the worst thing that's going to happen is we'll have to come home, that it won't work out and we'll come home, but Jesus is worth it, that the gospel and Jesus is worth us saying goodbye to our families and to our friends and moving to a country where we didn't really know anyone and we didn't speak the language. For logistic reasons, my wife and my son moved here first, and I waited like 3 days before coming because I was still an employee of the airline and just being back in the States and tying up loose ends before I flew over myself. I remember, getting on this bus in Japan with my stuff, and the bus stop here that you get off at from the airport bus is like in the middle of nowhere, and you can't even see anything. My bus got in at like 11 p.m. There's no lights, and you're like in the middle of these fields. And as I'm getting off the bus, I just remember thinking, like, I don't even know who's gonna pick me up. I don't know what they look like or anything. And here I am getting off this bus in the middle of the night with no working cell phone, with a bunch of luggage, in a country where, like, I only know how to say hello in Japanese at that point. Tomoko was there and picked me up, and of course things have been hard, but 4.5 years later, things are going really well, and God has been faithful to actually restore everything that we've had to give up to be here. We have an awesome Japanese community and family and friends, and I mean, even, we got a car this year and all of those things. God has been faithful, but even if he hadn't done that, getting to see the kingdom spread here, getting to touch, young Japanese students' hearts and introduce them to Jesus has been incredible, and doing it all, it's been worth it. So that is a short and sweet, even though I guess it's not that short, version of how we kind of chose Japan and how we moved here. If you want more info, you can please get a hold of me, and I would love to share more details about the story. It's really awesome. And if you're interested, leave a comment or something, and maybe I'll get my wife to make a video about how she was feeling and the whole process has been for her as well. I mean, it's crazy to think that was 4.5 years ago, but yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.